Jaime Lannister versus Aragorn. Who would win the Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings fight? And what GRM thinks. Jaime Lannister from Game of Thrones and Aragorn from The Lord of the Rings are two of the most renowned swordsmen in popular fantasy media, making it curious who would win in a duel. While the subject of the most talented sword fighter in either universe is a debate that can be argued by fans until the end of time, they're undoubtedly the most widely recognized for their talents. With that in mind, it's fun to pit them against each other, and even George R. R. Martin, the author of the A Song of Ice and Fire books, has weighed in. Popularized by the HBO TV show, the world of Game of Thrones is widely recognized for subverting the narrative elements in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings books and Peter Jackson's film adaptations. Jaime Lannister is a knight renowned for his skill with the sword, but the world Martin created is built to be accurate to historical medieval combat. These factors matter when comparing the two, as they dictate their experiences and ultimate skill level. Jaime Lannister is a knight celebrated for his talent in tournaments and on the battlefield throughout the Seven Kingdoms. And it's worth noting that he was the youngest Kingsguard in Westerosi history. He's in his 30s in Game of Thrones, placing him on a downward slope following his physical prime, but he's still described as an incredibly talented swordsman in both the show and the books. As he says, there are only 3 men in the Seven Kingdoms who might stand a chance against him, which would likely include the Mountain. That should be telling of something. Aragorn is one of the Dúnedain, and Tolkien noted that he was 6'6", giving him a height advantage over Jaime, who should be around 6'2" or 6'3". Aragorn is in his late 80s, which essentially puts him in his prime at the end of the Third Age. The Númenórean blood in him is diluted from nearly ages of breeding, but his long life has still allowed him to accumulate decades of combat experience, to the point where he survived the Battle of the Pelennor Fields in The Return of the King unscathed. When prompted with this exact question, George R. R. Martin gave an interesting response, vouching for his creation in the fight. He explains that Jaime Lannister would likely win the duel purely for the fact that he would show up in plate armor, whereas Aragorn generally only occasionally wears chainmail or leather. Martin's point is that, while it's not impossible for Aragorn to win a fight unarmored against an opponent wearing plate, as we saw Bronn do in Game of Thrones Season 1, it's highly unlikely. If we're assuming Jaime Lannister shows up in his Lannister plate armor, while Aragorn shows up in his ranger gear, George R. R. Martin's point could have some merit. Armor is made to withstand blows from swords, meaning Aragorn would have to target specific weak points while Jaime could land his hits anywhere. However, it seems like George R. R. Martin is referring to the film version of Aragorn, who is downplayed from how he's depicted in J.R.R. Tolkien's novels. Aragorn has decades of experience over Jaime Lannister, but even if one were to argue that Jaime is more skilled, Aragorn's bloodline gives him a distinct advantage. Aragorn doesn't just have Númenórean blood, he's descended from royalty, stemming all the way back to Elros, the half-elven first king of Númenor. Elros's great-grandmother is Melian, one of the Maya. Aragorn's blood traces back roughly 6,000 years to not just elves, but also to the mystical species of Gandalf, Saruman, and Sauron. Along with Andúril, the blade that cut off Sauron's finger, Aragorn has some fantastical advantages. Jaime Lannister comes from a proud line of kings and great lords, but Aragorn is essentially descended from angels. He's not Superman, but he has a stronger body and greater build than any man in the world of Game of Thrones. The movies don't depict Aragorn with these additional gifts, so it could be argued that Jaime from the TV show would stand a chance against Aragorn from the films. But if the book variants of these characters were to face off, it would be a decisive victory for the King of Gondor.